All right. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Theory and Theology. I got another cultural religion kind of topic. Kind of like a time period thing. So a lot of holidays just passed. For the lunar New Year, the Jewish New Year, stuff leading up to it, and it's come and gone. So Rosh Hashanah is over, Yom Kippur is over. I talked about Sukkot, and I want to talk a little bit about Simchat Torah and Parshah readings, I guess. So basically, at the end of Simchat Torah, at the end of Sukkot, like if you were able to follow and find that movie, Ushpizin, if you're able to watch that movie Ushpizin, that is a good example of a movie representing the holiday of Sukkot. Pretty much the whole thing is around the start, during, and I guess pretty much the breakdown of Sukkot. And then, so this year, just to recap, Rosh Hashanah was from sunset September 25th of 2022, ending on nightfall of September 27th of 2022. So that was the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, meaning Rosh is head, Ha is the, and Shana is year, head of the year. So the head of the year is the month called Tishrei, and so Tishrei 1 and Tishrei 2, those already occurred. And they say that, there's the day of Adam and Eve's creation and no work. And then, there's all these readings from Isaac's birth, and Ishmael, and that's for day one's readings, as well as the Haftarah readings of the birth of Samuel to barren Hannah. And then you have the second day's readings, which are the story of Isaac being bound, and Rebecca, and I guess Rebecca being born, and then the book of Jeremiah for the Haftarah. It's a part about God's love and about Rachel. Then Yom Kippur happened. That's the Day of Atonement. Sukkot was 7 days, October 9th of 2022 through October 16th of 2022. So that was from Tishrei 15. This year of 2022 is considered now, since this Rosh Hashanah passed, it is now 5783. So 5783. So Sukkot, otherwise called the Feast of Tabernacles or Festival of Booths. It's a holiday that's about gathering of harvest and to commemorate people dwell in what's called a sukkah, and also there's a commemoration of God's protection when the Israelites left Egypt, and so that goes on for a while. A lot of the readings were from Leviticus and Zechariah. The Parshah during that time was during the book of Numbers 29. And then for the people who like the New Testament, there's a story of Jesus and his interaction with this festival in the book of John. And then comes the holiday Simchat Torah, or the joy of the Torah, or rejoicing in the Torah. That holiday is was October 18th of 2022. And then the beginning of the readings of the Parshah beginning again is from October 22 of 2022. And so that's kind of the timeline. So in the timeline, if you're following like what Jesus would have been maybe experiencing during this timeline, there's this story in the book of John, like I mentioned, that has Jesus in there. He's basically, it's a very complex story. It doesn't seem complex sometimes, but it kind of is. So it's basically, I got a lot of pages to flip here. It seemed like a short story, and then it kind of just kept going. So let me see. The part of the story that where I started reading it, was let me see. I'm trying to see where it kind of starts. Pretty much at the beginning of chapter 7. Like in verse 2, it says, now the Jewish festival of booths was near. Some people say festival of tabernacles. So you see him going in secret to, after saying that he was going to remain in Galilee, after his brothers left to go to the festival, Jesus went as well, to go to Judea for the festival. And then at that time, you see a lot of conversation between Jesus and, others, like during the festival, during the middle of the festival, all the way till the last final climactic day of the festival. And then near that time period, that's where Simchat Torah would be. And then that would be similar to kind of near the time period we're at now, because after Simchat Torah becomes the start of the reading of the Parshah, starting basically the Torah reading all over again from the beginning of Genesis. And so just kind of like a history timeline. If you were comparing that history to like nowadays history, that's kind of like the last holidays that just happened from the beginning of the Jewish New Year all the way through till now, where we're at the point where this current Sabbath was called Parshah's Bereshit, is like the very first beginning. I think it goes to chapter 6 or so. I don't know where it ends. I don't have the book like right in front of me or the website in front of me, but I know the last reading that I saw that was supposed to be, I guess, for Friday. I don't know if that was Friday night. It looked like it was chapter 5 through some chunk of reading. So basically, the whole story where Jesus is involved during Sukkot basically has him talking to crowds. There's all this conversation about circumcision and the Sabbath and the laws and the Messiah. Is he the Messiah? Is he a prophet? Like, what is going on here? Who is this person? There's this combination of I'm not going to talk in too much detail about this, but basically the crowds, the Pharisees, people having different beliefs, Jesus' brothers. There's a lot of people playing roles in this. And there's a certain point where the temple police start getting involved with the Pharisees, and they want Jesus to get arrested. They're trying to arrest him based on, them saying that, there's this division in the people, that the Messiah doesn't come from Galilee. And, Jesus wasn't born in Galilee. They say that, the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem, where David was born, and so there's some division over all of this belief. And then basically what happens is the temple police, and there's like the chief of priests and the Pharisees, they want to know why why he wasn't arrested. And basically the temple police say they haven't heard anybody ever speak like this before. And then what happens is Nicodemus starts saying with our culture, we have to have a hearing. We have to have a hearing to find out what they're doing, saying that Nicodemus mentioning that the law doesn't judge people without first giving them a hearing, to kind of find out what's going on. And so, the Pharisees reply in anger towards Nicodemus, saying, are you also from Galilee? Like, kind of like, are you siding with him? And if you look at Nicodemus, he was a Pharisee. He came to Jesus earlier in the book of John. I don't know exactly where. Let me see. Probably in chapter 3, at the beginning of chapter 3, Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and Nicodemus basically mentions that saying, we know that you're a teacher who has come from God, because nobody can do those types of signs that Jesus was doing. And he mentions we, like as in plural. And traditionally it's taught that there's some reason why Nicodemus came to Jesus at night. People imply that he was going at night so he wouldn't be seen. So Nicodemus makes that comment, and there's not a lot more comments from Nicodemus. But he basically says, Jesus starts telling Nicodemus about, that no one has seen the kingdom of God without being born from above. And Nicodemus is confused, like how can someone who's old go back into their mother's womb? And Jesus kind of goes on this long explanation of things, without directly answering the question, saying, no one can enter the kingdom without being born of water and spirit or wind, or I don't know. There's something with these words of like wind and water and spirit and all this type of terminology, and Nicodemus doesn't really understand any of that. And Jesus just keeps going. There's like multiple paragraphs where Jesus just keeps on talking. I'm assuming he's still talking to Nicodemus. So that was basically before this time period. And then during the time period that would be kind of near where we're at now, there was other stuff happening where Jesus was already kind of in trouble. But yeah, like if you see Nicodemus, he's a very interesting character. There's some teaching that Jesus was a Pharisee. I don't know how accurate that is or inaccurate that is. But people say that his teachings, a lot of what he says is from Hillel and, this Pharisaic school of teaching. And he was a Pharisee, which is why you always see him talking to the Pharisees. Why he was always kind of like around them was because he was one. But I don't really know. I don't really know how to even tell if that was true or not, or if that's relevant. People say, because he was kind of like when we read the Bible a lot of times in the New Testament, we kind of read it from like, Jesus like reprimanding and like, scolding the Pharisees. But like someone else mentioned, this is the way you argue with friends. This is the way you kind of debate and banter with like friends, people people you're deeply acquainted with. You're having like these deep debates about stuff. You're not necessarily like arguing and saying like you're wrong, but more so like we talk about this all the time. Let's have a philosophical discussion about this deep topic. So that's what they say Jesus was doing whenever he was like interacting with these Pharisees. Kind of similar to how you see him interacting with Nicodemus. Just kind of like there's this teaching that Jesus is talking about, these things that the Pharisee doesn't really seem to understand, like where he got this, where like he's just like, I've never heard, I don't understand, I don't really understand this, and but he does say that they believe that he calls him rabbi and says, we do believe that you're sent from God. And so it's kind of like, well, we believe, but I also don't understand what you're saying in your comments. And there was a lot that Jesus had to say. Sometimes I can't connect the dots. It feels like when I read something that somebody says, or, talking to Jesus, and then Jesus starts talking, it's like, it feels like he's not even talking about the same thing sometimes. Like Nicodemus mentioned something about, Jesus being, sent from God, and then Jesus starts talking about something that doesn't seem that related, about being born again and all these different types of things that Nicodemus wasn't aware of. And the interesting thing is like, if you're a Pharisee, you're very well studied. Like you spend your time studying. That's your profession pretty much, is studying the religion. And so for someone to say something that you don't understand, sounds like it would be really complex. And for Jesus to be saying all these things that other Pharisees were kind of like, wait a second, like, pressuring not to believe, and Nicodemus did believe, and a lot of the crowds believed, and they were saying basically, well, the crowds, the argument during that time, that the Pharisees and the temple police and all these people that were trying to get Jesus arrested, the argument that they had against him was basically that he was the argument that they said is like, okay, the crowds aren't educated about this like we are, so of course they believe. And it's like, why would we believe? It's kind of, but it seems kind of like a not so truthful thing. If Nicodemus earlier came up saying we believe, it seems like people were kind of talking out of anger or something. And I get it. I've been there before. I've had experiences with church people, religious people, where you're in a group of people of a religion and you're the same religion, and they open up a discussion, and I've gone off, I've, like, it wasn't like something I would typically do, but I remember once being seated at this table with a bunch of pastors, and the pastor that I knew, who I went to church with, was kind of like, you guys are younger, we were much younger, so the people that they chose from our church to go to these things, we were all like way younger, like 30 years younger than these people at the least. And I was seated at a table with a bunch of people who were way older than me, and just sitting there, just like dominating the conversation with these topics that were just really kind of like pushing people's nerves, like I was like kind of digging into the culture of things, probably out of anger, but I wasn't very connected to that. But I definitely, part of me almost regrets it, and then another part of me is like, no, maybe I was actually saying what I actually needed to say, and maybe they actually needed to hear that. But I remember saying some things along the lines of, how can churches push homeless people out? How can churches, not be loving towards other people? I made a comment about like, like how do you really love your neighbor? Like, does that sound realistic? If there's someone that you don't like, how do you actually love that person? If there's someone that you really just don't like, really, like, are you really gonna really love them? Like, it's one thing to tolerate them, it's one thing to like not be rude or mean or just like get along and force it. It's another thing to actually like actively love somebody that you really don't like. when you love somebody, you treat them way differently than you treat somebody that you don't love. Like when you love people, you want to keep in touch with them, you want to be around them, you want to stay connected with them. You don't want to be like distant and like ignoring them and avoiding them. Like usually when you're not interested in being in touch with somebody, you just aren't. And when you don't like them, you're not gonna go out of your way to treat them like you really want to be in touch and be in contact and like hanging out and stuff. And it's one thing to love your neighbor, it's another thing to love your enemy. Those are kind of two different things. But yeah, like there was that question in the Bible too, where they said, who is my neighbor? It's like, that's a pretty deep question. It's like, yeah, that's what I would want to know too. It's like, who are these people exactly, that we need to be doing all this loving towards? But yeah, I remember kind of just like digging in on some topics to a point where I could just sense that like people didn't know how to comment. They were kind of trying to like not comment. I was being a jerk, I'm not like, it wasn't like the proudest moment I've ever had, but it was also just like, I was just debating with people, and I don't know where that came from. Like, I wasn't mad, I don't think. I wasn't like intentionally upset at anybody specific, but definitely there was a lot of stuff coming out that I was a little surprised about, and I didn't really think much of it until later. Like, it was later on when I started remembering that experience, and I was like, oh gosh, like, why was I acting like that? I was being such a jerk, but I clearly had some things going on. But yeah, I mean, if it's a discussion like that, where you see like, I'm not like comparing myself to Jesus. I'm just saying, like, if you've been around people who are like ultra religious people, and you kind of can see how some of the ways are kind of just not helping out any part of society as well as the community of people, and you see that it's causing people pain, and you feel like you want to speak up about it, and you're given the floor to speak up about it, and then you decide to speak up about it. That's kind of like what I can relate to. Like, it's kind of that type of experience where you're just like, okay, like, you guys are the leaders and you're ahead of me, but you're also asking these questions, so of course I'm going to answer them, and it's like, was it that, was Jesus doing that kind of thing, but from an actual, like, perspective of someone who'd learned and everything? Was he doing that kind of thing? Or was he doing another kind of thing? Was he, actually, closely friends with these people, with these Pharisees? Was he actually a Pharisee? Was it like somewhere in between these extremes? I don't really know. Like, some of this is just really new information to me. I don't really know. I mean, the stories themselves aren't necessarily new to me, but doing this kind of process of like connecting maybe like current time periods and like current like commemorative like dates of things and like stories in the Bible, that's not really something I'm used to doing. Like, looking at, okay, what was Jesus doing in this time period, or like what was happening in history in this time period. So, moving a little forward with, say, Simchat Torah is done. We're now starting the beginning of the beginning of Genesis. all I can do is just breathe deeply and take deep breaths. Like I feel like I started this podcast with Genesis, with like talking, I think it was like talking about like Bel and the Dragon and like the Apocrypha or something. And now we're all the way over again to, the book of Genesis. And I'm still not any more clear on it today than I was then. Now I'm not going to read the whole thing, but even focusing on the first day is already complicated. So the first day is the first 5 verses of the Bible. The second day is verses 6 through 8. It's a lot, guys. To me, it feels to be a lot. For me, the first sentence already gets complicated because of the name of God. Like, is it even plural? I don't even know. So basically, it just talks about the heavens and the earth. So that's kind of like 2 separate things, heaven and earth, right? And just these words of the earth being a formless void and darkness covering the face of the deep. And then there was the Spirit of God, or the wind from God, sweeping over the face of the waters. It's like, okay, let's stop there. It's kind of like, I get a little like, okay, that's a lot of different things happening, considering that nothing exists. So it's kind of like, that part already just confuses me, because it's like, if you say the earth was formless, a formless void, or if it was formless and void. I mean, I've seen like different versions of it written. But basically, for something to be formless and void, what is it? Like, what is it? Like, if you have like a solid object, right? That's not necessarily void, and it's not formless. It might be like looking like some kind of weird rock or something. But like, how can something be formless and void? Like, how can it be empty? You're empty and without form, without shape. So something without shape that's completely empty. I mean, how do you make something out of that? Like, it's basically nothing. Like, what's the difference between formless and void, or a formless void, and nothing? Like, I don't know the difference. I mean, if something's formless, I don't know if that means shapeless or doesn't hold a form. I don't really know what that word means. And if it's void, I mean, a void is basically like a hole, right? Void means nothing. Void means zero. There's nothing there. But there was darkness and there was deep as well. I don't know how something can be deep. I don't know. That seems like a distance, right? Something being deep. But darkness, okay. But, so there was darkness over the deep, whatever the deep was. I don't know what the deep was, but there was something that was deep, which was maybe the void was deep. I don't know. And somehow, God is hovering over or sweeping over, or the Spirit of God is, or the wind of from God, or whatever it is sweeping over the face of the waters. So I'm already, this second verse is already just like waters. Like, how's there water? If there's something that's formless, if there's something that's void, and it's got deep, and it's got darkness, but there's water, and then that's when God creates light. So that's what to me is interesting, is a lot of times we focus on, God creating light and separating the light from the darkness, and then we say there's evening and there's morning, and that was the first day. But then, like, how was there the first day when there was no sun and there was no moon and there was no stars? What is this day? And why is there all this other stuff there? Like, there's already stuff, right? Water is something. And if something is deep, I mean, that implies maybe that there's some shallow other, like, everything can't be deep, right? Like, there has to be some shallow portion to compare something to if there's depth there. Like, you think of a canyon, it can be a deep canyon, but there's still, like, a shelf of a canyon. There's still, the top of the canyon. I mean, and then there's water. There's already water there. Water's there before the sun and the moon are even created, before the stars are even created. I mean, the stars are basically like a form of the sun. Like, the sun is a star, so let's just say the stars and the moon, I guess, technically. But our sun and other stars and the moon, our moon, I don't know. But I don't understand how there would already be water. Like, there was already water there. And if you start moving forward to the second day, God starts separating the waters from the waters. Separating the waters from above and below the dome, making a dome and separating the waters above and below it. So it's like, God never said let there be water. He said let there be light. But he separated the water. Like, the water was already there before the light, and the light was already there before the sun and the moon. It's just like this just sequence of things just goes like that. To me, is already too much of a complicated start. Some people are just like, just read it. You just read it and you just go and read it with the flow. And I'm just like, I'm not reading with the flow. Like, this is just, it's a lot to try to think about, like, what was actually happening here. And it's kind of just an interesting thing, because it's like, you don't really think about it too much sometimes. Like, it's just easy to read, and then it's kind of like, what is actually happening here? Like, I can't quite wrap my finger around what exactly is going on in this creation story. Even at the very, very beginning of the first 2 days, it's just a lot. It's a lot going on, and I'm not mad at it. But it's just super complex, It sounds like there was already some form of foundation that maybe God created all that and then, was using those to build. It seems like he was building off of everything that was made before, to build into the next kind of things, day by day. But in 6 days, I mean, and in the Bible, a lot of times with these numbers, 6 is not considered a good number. 7 is considered a holy number. And so the creation story has 7 days at the beginning of creation, but only 6 of the days was God actually making stuff. So I don't know if I'm gonna keep recording about Genesis and all that. But basically it's just kind of, something I wanted to talk about with a bit of a historical timestamp to it. Just, this time of year, I really like to keep in mind kind of connection with the seasons changing, the sun going down so dang early, like a little after 6 p.m. and it's already dark, and a little after 7 a.m. the sun finally decides to come out. It's like, I was already waking up when it's dark, but now I'm waking up and it's like always dark. And then after I finish work, it's like there's just a couple hours and then it's dark again. It's like, I miss the sun coming out the sun staying out till like 8:30 at like 8:30 p.m. and like being able to go to the beach after taking a nap after work. It's like I miss that. I miss longer days. At least we're having a lot of sun, but the cloudiness is coming back. We don't get the fall changing leaf colors, but it really does bring me to a lot of, because it's Halloween season, it really does bring me to, that, I don't want to call it a focus, but kind of like, the history of Christianity and, the mainstream religion of our country, even though, we're not really having to be Christians or anything like that. But it's like, a lot of what was, I guess, considered more official was based on kind of like Christian kind of values and traditions. I mean, traditionally we get Christian holidays off, right? I mean, we get federal holidays too, but we get Christian and federal holidays. We're not getting Muslim days. We're not getting Jewish days. I mean, we might get Jewish days depending where you work. And I think, at least where I live and work, I think if you have certain religious days, you work. Certain religious days, you work. According to what your religion is, you're allowed to kind of take days off if you need to. But yeah, so it's definitely like a lot. There's always a lot happening this season, and I do find it interesting, but usually if I'm gonna start studying like paganism, like usually it happens around this time of year, and I've never really done a combination of kind of jumping back and forth between different things. So I'm kind of liking that a lot, actually. It's fun for me, even though it's like, I kind of wish I could have like a cohesive post or like a playlist of certain topics and just put those topics in categories in those playlists. I don't think this app is really set up to do that. And I don't have like a full website developed to make like different tabs or anything. So yeah, I'm not going to go that far. That just sounds like a lot to do for something that I just want to post real quick. But all right, guys. So that is it for now. And thanks for listening.